"Who's next?" "Don't all jump at once," he barked, his voice a gravelly mix of challenge and amusement. A quiet voice, surprisingly close, cut through the masculine energy. "Could I go next?" They all turned. Standing just a few feet away was a woman who could not have been more out of place. She looked to be in her late 60s, maybe older. Long silver-gray hair was tied back in a simple loose knot. She wore sensible walking shoes, comfortable slacks, and a bright red tweed jacket that seemed more suited for a university lecture than a crucible of military fitness. She was smiling faintly, her blue eyes crinkling at the corners, holding a worn leather tote bag in one hand. For a moment, there was only the sound of the nearby surf. Then, a low chuckle rippled through the group. The petty officer Jensen wiped his brow with the back of his hand and took a step toward her, his expression dripping with condescending helpfulness. "Ma'am, I think you might be a little lost," he said, his voice loud enough for his friends to hear. "The visitor center is back by the main gate. Did you get turned around looking for the commissary?" The woman's smile didn't waver. She adjusted her grip on the tote bag, its worn leather creaking softly. "No, I know exactly where I am. I was just watching. You all have excellent form. I was wondering if I could use the bar for a moment." Jensen exchanged a look with one of his buddies, who was now openly grinning, covering his mouth with his hand. The absurdity of it was just too much. An old lady in a tweed jacket wanting to use the pull-up bar at the SEAL's private playground. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Jensen said, his tone shifting from helpful to patronizing, "this equipment is, well, it's pretty demanding. We wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Maybe there's a nice bench by the water you could sit on." "I'll be careful," she replied, her voice still even and calm. It was a calmness that was starting to feel less like grandmotherly placidity and more like something else, something solid and unmovable. "I won't be long." She took a step toward the bar. Jensen, instinctively protective of his domain, put a hand out, not touching her but blocking her path. "Seriously, ma'am, this is a restricted training area for active duty personnel. I can't let civilians just wander in and start using the equipment. It's a liability issue." He was trying to sound official, but the smirk was back. "Unless you're here to sign up for Bud / I hear they're taking all comers these days." The joke landed with his team, who erupted in low, contained laughter. The woman Alice Franklin simply looked at his hand, then back up at his face. Her gaze was steady, her posture unwavering. Decades of ingrained military bearing were hidden beneath the civilian clothes, an invisible framework of discipline and steel. She didn't look angry. She didn't look insulted. She just looked patient, as if she were waiting for a toddler to finish a tantrum. This unnerved Jensen more than any argument could have. He was used to challenges, to aggression, to a clear hierarchy of physical dominance. He had no protocol for a quiet, persistent old woman in a red jacket. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk," he said, his voice losing some of its cocky edge. "I'm just saying, this isn't the place for you. Why don't you let me walk you over to the front gate, and we can get you an escort to wherever you need to go? Are you visiting your son? Your grandson? Maybe?" Alice's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, a brief, unreadable shadow passing through them. "I'm not visiting anyone," she said. "I'm here to see if the standards have slipped." The statement was so bizarre, so out of context, that it hung in the air like a puff of smoke. The standards. Their standards. The SEAL's standards. What could this woman possibly know about their standards? Jensen's patience finally snapped. "Okay, you know what? Fine. You want the bar? You can have the bar." He gestured with a flourish of theatrical frustration. "Go ahead, knock yourself out. Just don't sue the Navy when you dislocate your shoulder." He stepped back, crossing his thick, tattooed arms over his chest. His team fell silent, a captive audience to the ridiculous spectacle about to unfold. They shuffled into a semicircle, their expressions a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. This was going to be hilarious. The old lady would be lucky if she could even hang from the bar for more than a second. Alice walked to the pull-up station. She placed her leather tote bag carefully on the sandy ground beside it. She took a moment not to stretch but to unbutton the red tweed jacket. She folded it with a neat, practiced precision and laid it over her bag. Underneath she wore a simple dark gray t-shirt and the same slacks. Her arms, revealed for the first time, were not the frail, withered limbs they'd expected. They were lean, wiry, and etched with the kind of sinewy definition that only comes from a lifetime of consistent functional strength. Old scars faded to white, traced patterns on her forearms. She reached into the pocket of her slacks and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a coin, tarnished silver, its details worn smooth by time and touch. She rubbed her thumb over its surface, a familiar reflexive gesture. Her eyes went distant, just for a second, the sounds of the gym fading away. The memory was sharp, visceral. The deafening roar inside a C-130 Hercules, the air vibrating with the power of the engines. Outside, a curtain of torrential rain lashed against the small, thick windows. The only light inside the fuselage was a dim, hellish red. She was 20 years younger, her hair pulled back tightly under a helmet, her face smudged with camouflage paint, just like the dozen young men of SEAL Team 5 surrounding her. They were a knot of quiet, focused lethality. She was their intel specialist, their analyst, the one they called Athena. She wasn't supposed to be on the bird, wasn't supposed to go outside the wire, but the mission parameters had changed at the last second. They needed her eyes on the target package right up to the jump. As the ramp began to lower, revealing a black, storm-tossed sky, the team leader, a young lieutenant with old eyes, had pressed this very coin into her hand. "Just in case," he'd said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "You're one of us tonight, Doc." She blinked, the bright Coronado sun pulling her back to the present. The young SEALs were still watching, their smirks beginning to fade into confusion. What was with the coin? Was it for good luck? Alice slipped the coin back into her pocket. She reached up and took hold of the thick steel bar. Her grip was sure, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath, and then, with a smoothness that defied her age, she pulled herself up. Her chin cleared the bar, then her chest. She held herself at the top, motionless for a beat. Then she lowered herself with perfect control until her arms were fully extended. That was one. Jensen's smirk was gone. One pull-up was more than he'd expected. Impressive for a woman her age, he thought. A fluke, probably. Then she did another, and another. Each repetition was identical. A powerful, explosive pull, a brief pause at the peak, and a slow, controlled descent. There was no kipping, no swinging, no cheating. It was pure, raw, disciplined strength. 5, 6, 7. The other conversations in the gym had died down. The clanking of weights had stopped. Everyone was watching now. The young SEALs in her audience were completely silent, their mouths slightly agape. 10, 11, 12. This wasn't just a fluke. This was a statement. At 15, she paused at the bottom, hanging motionless. Jensen thought she was finished. He was about to say something, some face-saving compliment. But then she began to move again. This time she brought her knees up to her elbows, performing a perfect hanging leg raise before executing another pull-up. She was adding variations. She was doing one of their own gut-check routines. A few hundred yards away, a man in his late 50s was on his morning run along the beach path. Captain Evans, the commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center, liked to clear his head before a day of meetings and bureaucracy. He saw the crowd gathered at the grinder and slowed his pace, curious. That was unusual. His boys were usually too focused on their own workouts to spectate. He jogged closer, his eyes adjusting to the scene. He saw the semicircle of SEALs, their expressions of shock and awe. He saw the woman on the bar. At first, all he registered was the long gray hair and the strange civilian clothes folded neatly on the ground. A dependent, a lost tourist who had somehow wandered deep into the base. Then he saw her form. He saw the ramrod's straight posture, even while hanging. He saw the methodical, economic movement. It was a familiar cadence, a rhythm of strength he hadn't seen in years. It was the form of someone who had not just learned the movements but had perfected them over decades, burning the pathways into their very soul. He stopped running. A prickle of memory, distant and sharp, ran up his spine. The red jacket, the quiet authority he could sense even from this distance. He started walking toward the crowd, his heart beating a little faster. As he got closer, he heard one of the young SEALs whisper in disbelief, "She's at 25. That's more than I did yesterday." Alice dropped from the bar, landing softly on the balls of her feet with the quiet grace of a cat. She wasn't even breathing heavily. She picked up a towel from her bag and wiped her hands, her expression calm, as if she had just finished a light warm-up. Jensen was speechless. The foundation of his world, a world built on the certainty of his own physical superiority, had been cracked. He and his team had been humbled, completely and utterly, by an old woman. He felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. This was his moment of overreach. Humiliated and confused, he fell back on the only thing he had left, his authority, however minor. He had to regain control of the situation. "All right, that's enough," he said, his voice tight and strained. "I don't know who you are or what this little stunt was about, but this is a restricted area. Your credentials, ma'am. Now, I want to see your ID, because I'm pretty sure these credentials," he gestured vaguely at the air, "are too old to be valid. You probably don't even remember the current base access procedures." He was grasping at straws, trying to find some rule, any rule, she had broken. In fact, I'm calling base security. This could be a legitimate breach. It was then that Captain Evans arrived at the edge of the crowd. He saw Jensen puffed up, trying to intimidate the woman, and in that moment, as she turned slightly, he got a clear view of her face. The years had softened the edges, but the eyes were the same. The sharp, intelligent, no-nonsense eyes that had once briefed him as a terrified young ensign before his first high-risk deployment. The eyes of a living legend. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Evans muttered under his breath. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he dialed his command Master Chief. "Master Chief," Evans said, his voice low but urgent. "It's the captain. I need you and the XO at the grinder. Right now. No, I don't care if he's in a meeting. Get him. We have a situation. It's Alice Franklin." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Excuse me, sir. Alice Franklin, as in Athena." "The one and only," Evans confirmed, his eyes locked on the scene. "And one of my petty officers is currently making the biggest mistake of his entire career. Move." Inside the Naval Special Warfare Center headquarters, the call sent a shockwave through the command suite. A young lieutenant tasked by the scrambling Command Master Chief typed the name Alice M. Franklin into the Global Military Personnel Database. He blinked, thinking there was a mistake. He ran it again. The screen filled with data that seemed impossible. Franklin, Alice M., Master Chief Petty Officer, retired. The scroll bar on the side of the window was tiny, indicating a file of immense length. He started clicking through the tabs. Awards and decorations. Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart with 1 gold star, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service Commendation Medal. The list went on and on, a river of valor and service that spanned more than 30 years. Assignment history. He saw postings that made his eyes widen. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Naval Special Warfare Group 1, Senior Enlisted Advisor, the first woman officially assigned to an SDV SEAL delivery vehicle team as an embedded mission analyst. Her name was attached to operations that were still the stuff of hushed legend in the community, missions in places that weren't on any official maps, during times when women were supposedly nowhere near the front lines. The Command Master Chief, a giant of a man with a chest full of his own medals, leaned over the lieutenant's shoulder, his face grim. "Pull up her photo from her last billet," he rumbled. The lieutenant clicked. A photo appeared. A woman in her late 40s, in a crisp Navy service uniform, her face lined with experience but her eyes sharp as flint. On her collar were the gold-fouled anchors of a Master Chief. Pinned to her chest was a golden trident. It wasn't the Special Warfare Operator pin the SEALs wore, but the Special Warfare Specialist pin, an insignia so rare most active-duty sailors had never even seen one. "It's her," the Master Chief breathed. "It's Athena. Get the cars." Back at the grinder, 2 black government SUVs rolled to a stop on the access road, their engines a low hum. The doors opened and Captain Evans, his Command Master Chief, his executive officer, and a sharp young female lieutenant emerged. They moved with a singular, undeniable purpose, their faces set like stone. The small crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Jensen, who had been in the middle of trying to lecture Alice on base security protocols, froze. His mouth went dry. The sight of the base's entire senior command triad descending on his location could only mean one thing: he was in a universe of trouble. But they didn't look at him. They walked straight past him, their eyes fixed on Alice. Captain Evans stopped 3 feet in front of her. He took a breath, his shoulders squaring. In the utter silence that had fallen over the gym, he brought his hand up in the sharpest, most profound salute of his life. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect. "Master Chief Franklin," his voice boomed, clear and strong, resonating with an authority that left no room for doubt. "It is an honor to see you again, ma'am." Alice simply nodded, a small knowing smile touching her lips. She did not return the salute. As a retiree, she was not required to, but the respect flowed between them, a palpable current. The Command Master Chief and the XO snapped to attention and rendered their own salutes beside their captain. The young SEALs, including a stunned and pale Jensen, stood dumbfounded. "Master Chief? This old woman was a Master Chief?" Captain Evans held his salute, his eyes locked with hers. He turned his head slightly, so his voice would carry to every person gathered there. "For the benefit of those who are too young to know their own history," he began, his voice laced with iron, "let me tell you who you're looking at. This is Master Chief Alice Franklin. When I was a brand new ensign, so green I still tasted of salt water. This woman was already a legend. She was one of the very first women to serve in direct operational support of a SEAL team in the field. They called her Athena because she was the goddess of wisdom and warfare. He took a breath, his gaze sweeping over the young operators. In Desert Storm, when an entire platoon from SEAL Team 3 was walking into a catastrophic ambush, it was Master Chief Franklin, then a first-class petty officer, who spotted the discrepancy in the enemy signals intelligence. It was her voice on the radio that called them back from the brink. For that, she was awarded the Silver Star. A murmur went through the crowd. In the mountains of Afghanistan in 2002, when a medevac helicopter was shot down, she was on the ground at the FOB. She organized the Quick Reaction Force, coordinated air support, and personally carried plasma out to the crash site under active mortar fire, saving the lives of 2 operators and the entire flight crew. For that, she was awarded the Navy Cross. The silence was now absolute, thick with reverence and shock. Jensen felt like the ground was about to swallow him whole. She developed protocols for intelligence gathering in asymmetric warfare that are still in the textbook we use at BAD/today. The stress test pull-up set she just performed, she invented it in 1998 to prove a point about functional strength over sheer bulk. She has served in every major conflict this nation has seen for 30 years. She has forgotten more about naval special warfare than any of us will ever know. She trained, mentored, and saved men who would go on to become the leaders of this community. Men who were my heroes. He finally slowly lowered his hand. He turned his full attention to Jensen, his eyes cold fury. "Petty Officer Jensen," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "Your primary job as a SEAL is situational awareness. To observe, to analyze, to understand your environment before you act. You saw a woman of advanced age in a red jacket, and you made an assumption. You failed to see the bearing. You failed to see the discipline. You failed to see the quiet confidence of someone who has absolutely nothing to prove. You chose to see a target for your own arrogance. You have dishonored yourself, you have embarrassed your teammates, and you have shown profound disrespect to a pillar of this community. You will report to my office at 1300, in your dress whites. Be prepared to explain your actions in writing to the Master Chief of the Navy." Jensen's face was the color of ash. He could only manage a choked, "Aye, aye, Captain." Alice stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Captain Evans's arm. "He's a good kid, Mark. Just a little full of himself. We were all like that once." She then looked directly at Jensen, her eyes not angry, but filled with a teacher's stern wisdom. "The standards are the wall that keeps chaos out, Petty Officer. They are everything. But they are not about gender, and they are not about age. They are about one thing and one thing only: capability. You were so busy looking at my gray hair and my jacket, you forgot to look at my eyes. You forgot to assess the threat, or in this case, the asset." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Experience doesn't expire with youth. It calcifies. It becomes bone. That gray hair you see, it wasn't given to me. I earned it, one mission at a time. It means I survived the things that broke other younger, stronger men. Never, ever forget that." As she spoke of survival, the memory of the coin flashed one last time, this time in full, brutal clarity. The chaotic aftermath of an IED strike in Iraq, 2005. Dust, smoke, and the screams of men. One of her SEALs, the team's breacher, was down, his leg a ruin. She was there in the back of the MRAP, cinching a tourniquet high and tight, her hands covered in his blood, her voice calm and steady in his ear, keeping him anchored to the world as the life threatened to flee his body. He was the one who had given her the coin years before. As a young lieutenant, now a grizzled chief, he'd pressed it back into her hand at the hospital in Germany. "Twice, Athena," he'd whispered through a morphine haze. "Twice you saved me. This is yours, for good." The fallout on the base was swift and decisive. Captain Evans mandated a new block of instruction for all hands on the history of naval special warfare, with a specific focus on the unsung pioneers, including the women who had served in the shadows for decades. A new section in the main headquarters building was dedicated as the Pioneers Hall, and the first photograph mounted was a black and white image of a 25-year-old Alice Franklin, in grease-stained fatigues, smiling, aboard a Navy vessel somewhere in a forgotten sea. A week later, Jensen, looking smaller and infinitely more humble, found Alice sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean, not far from the grinder. He approached hesitantly, twisting his cover in his hands. "Ma'am, Master Chief," he began, his voice barely a whisper. I wanted to apologize. What I did was, there's no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was disrespectful, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." Alice looked up at him, her expression serene. She patted the bench beside her. He sat down stiffly. We all make mistakes, petty officer, she said, her voice kind. I once wrote off a young ensign as being too book-smart and scared to lead. Thought he'd get his men killed. I was wrong. He turned out to be one of the finest officers I ever served with. His name was Mark Evans. Jensen looked up, surprised. Everyone gets one, she continued, a faint smile on her lips. One big, stupid learning mistake. It's what you do after that defines your career. It's what you learn from it that defines you as a man. She stood up, brushing the wrinkles from her slacks. As she turned to leave, she paused. And for the record, she said, looking back at him, on your pull-ups, you're letting your shoulders roll forward at the top of the movement. It'll cause an impingement in a few years. Keep your scapula retracted. Protect your instruments. She gave him a small nod and walked away, her red jacket a bright spot against the brilliant blue of the Pacific. Jensen sat there for a long time, watching her go. A lesson in humility and strength burned into his memory. A lesson delivered by the unassuming hero he had been so quick to judge. If you were inspired by Master Chief Franklin's story, and the countless real-world women like her who chose a life of service and sacrifice, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to She Chose Valor for more stories honoring our nation's veterans.